Two stories. The first one from the Bible. We have in the Gospel of Mark, where we heard our story read today, we have already come through the crowds and the cheering of Palm Sunday. But we know they don't understand what Jesus' calling is, because they're the same crowd that called for his crucifixion a few days later. And the disciples are no better. They have disputed Jesus' statements that he will suffer, be rejected, and then killed. And their total misunderstanding of what is happening is seen in chapter 11, when they argue about who will be on the right and the left hands of Jesus when he comes into his kingdom. You see, they mistake Jesus' rejection of paternalism, his denunciation of systemic religious prejudice, and his nonviolent resistance of Roman oppression. They mistake these things as the actions of a revolutionary leader who would take the reins of power. They do not understand his mission statement, and I quote, "The kingdom of God is near, repent and follow me." They don't understand that this is a call to turn from all prejudice, from all oppression, from all self-aggrandizement, and to receive others as children of God, and of course to receive ourselves as children of God, as we did with Owen and Avery here this morning. But it is this very path, this very mission, that has placed Jesus in the crosshairs of the religious authorities, who are now at close to the end of the book of Mark, determined to arrest him quietly, and then after the festival, kill him. The crowds and the disciples don't understand this, but Mark won't let us forget it. Today's story takes place in Simon the leper's house. The leper is not his last name. He is a leper. And that has very serious consequences in ancient Israel. If you converse with a leper, you are considered unclean. But if you eat at the table of a leper, you are unclean beyond repair. Well, you have to go to the temple to be cleansed. And Jesus and his disciples eating at Simon the leper's house puts them in the place of being impure and therefore outcast by the religious upright of the day. In the ancient world, eating with others was an intimate experience. You didn't break bread with just any Tom, Dick, or Harry. They had to be people who were socially acceptable and trusted in your inner circle. So, into this meal, into this homey scene, barges a woman, unnamed, and she uncorks an expensive jar of ointment and pours every last drop of it on Jesus' head. Now, by expensive, Mark means expensive. 300 denarii is about the amount that a laborer would be paid in a year. So she has taken a year's wages and she has dumped it on his head. And there are some who are very upset about this. Oh, what a wasteful thing, Look what she has done. That money could have been given to the poor. And I certainly do understand that point of view. But Jesus has a different take on it. Jesus thinks, what an extravagant thing. My goodness, look what she has done. And he sees that while the crowds and the disciples do not understand what's going on with him, she gets it. She understands what his mission is about. Because she has anointed him, he says, for burial. She gets that he must suffer, be rejected, and die because of his mission. That God's kingdom is near. That all people are to be loved So, Jesus' extravagant response to this, let her alone, he says, for wherever the good news of God's love is announced in the world, she will be remembered for doing this. And then our story for the day ends with Judas seeking out the religious authorities to betray Jesus to them. One of the hypotheses about Judas doing this is that he didn't do it because he was evil. He did it because he was trying to force Jesus' hand, to put him in a situation where he would have to stand up against the Roman Empire and make Israel its own kingdom again. Story number 2. Let me tell you about Kendall. Kendall is a friend of Tamara's and Piper's. I got to know him through them. He grew up a Mennonite, a very conservative German Christian sect with a very close community. Kendall's mother had grown up Amish, also a very tight Christian community, more conservative than the Mennonites. The difference between the Amish and the Mennonites are the Amish are the ones who drive the buggies down the road, clip-clop, you know. The Mennonites use cars. So some of them are really conservative, and the others use the modern world in different ways to help them work. Kendall's grandfather had left the Amish when his children were in elementary school because he wanted them to have a better education. And then Kendall's grandfather and grandmother were shunned by the Amish, which didn't mean they couldn't talk to them, but what it meant was that they couldn't go to worship with the Amish community, and that if they were visiting family members, while they could eat at the same time, they couldn't eat with them at the same table. And so they had to be at another table, and they couldn't put their utensils into the serving bowls. They had to be served by someone else. So you see, there was this way of kind of keeping them out, but still keeping them relatively close. This particular Amish family was considered to be the largest Amish family in the country, with over 2,000 members. But Grandma and Grandpa couldn't worship with them or eat in a normal way with them. And their daughter, who was Kendall's mother, married a town boy who became a Mennonite. And he was accepted by the community, including her father, who would by then become a Mennonite bishop, and his wife. Now, Kendall's raised a Mennonite, and he goes off to college. And there, after years of understanding that he was not like other boys, Kendall came out of the closet, a gay man. And when he came out to his mother, who is the daughter of a Mennonite bishop, he feared the worst. But she didn't tell him that he was bad, nor did she say he wasn't acceptable to God. Rather, she wondered what she was going to say to the rest of the church about this. Well, if you grow up a PK or a BK, in this would be a bishop's kid in this case, you're thinking a lot about what the group thinks might be more important than what you think individually. So she was concerned about that. And while she didn't understand Kendall fully, she said that she loved him. Kendall got involved in the gay rights movement, and a few years later, he was involved in organizing a march on Washington. He asked his mother and father if they would come and march with him in the parade. This was a big risk because Kendall was in charge of all the volunteers and had become the one who was in charge of all the famous people that were going to be there, all gathered in one place for the television cameras, that would be coming there. And if Kendall's mother and father happened to be there with Kendall when the television cameras were on, they could make national news. And they would be exposed to their community. But of course, it wasn't that big a risk because none of the Amish had a TV. And very few of the Mennonites had a TV. So while they did take a risk, it wasn't that big. They said yes. And he was delighted and saw their response as an extravagant one. And there they were in this gigantic parade marching in Washington, D.C., and people with all manner of costumes on and colorful signs that are being held up. And here is Kendall's mother, a Mennonite, fish out of water. And she turns to Kendall and she says to him at one point, "Kendall, don't you think that people would take us a lot more seriously if there weren't so many people in really bright colored boas out here?" Oh, he loved her for that. A few years after that, Kendall's grandmother, the one who was from the largest Amish family in the country, was dying. And Kendall had not come out to her, and he decided that her deathbed was not the place to do that, so he didn't. But at her funeral, many, many of the family members were gathered together, and he realized there was an opportunity here. And he went to some of the elders, and he asked them if he might not be able to do a survey of all of the family to get some genealogical information from them. Because he said, I'm probably the only one in the entire 2,000 members in this family that owns a computer. And the elders thought about it, and they thought, that would be a good idea. It would be nice to have a record. So they gave him permission to send out a questionnaire to everyone and get it all done in the computer. But a few months later, one of the elders totally accidentally discovered that Kendall was gay. And he got the elders together, and they wrote a letter to him, quoting the book of Leviticus, that said that they can no longer proceed with this project because God would not honor a project in which a homosexual was involved. And they're sorry, but they will have to cut off relationship with him. And Kendall was very upset by this. And he asked if he could have a meeting with the elders. And the elders said, surprisingly, well, yes, you can do that. And so they had a big meal around one of those big tables that you see on TV when they show you the pictures of the Amish. And there were 18 elders, all men over 80 years of age, that were sitting at this table. And his mother had asked to come too. And they said, well, okay, we've got the gay kid, we may as well have the mother too. And so she came as well. And after they ate the meal, Kendall was totally surprised. Because out of character, his mother asked to stand to speak, and they gave her permission. And she said, now look, this is my son, and I love him. And you are not to disrespect him in any way. Do you understand? And they nodded their heads. And Kendall thought, that's the strongest thing my mother has ever done in public. And he was deeply grateful for her extravagance on his behalf. And then they asked Kendall to stand up and speak. And there they were, sitting with their jaws locked with theological arguments and biblical quotes, ready to refute whatever he might say. But he said this. He said, I have come here today because I am what I am, and I can't control that. And what I am is a member of this family. And I don't want to lose that. And even though we disagree about things, I want to be a part of you. Well, they weren't ready for this. They had verses memorized on the tips of their tongues and ready to go. They didn't know what to say. They were befuddled and baffled, and they sat there in silence for some time. Until finally, the oldest elder among them stood up. And he said, Kendall, do you know why on every Amish table there is a basket of sliced bread at every meal? Kendall said, yes, I do know. There's a basket of sliced bread on the table for every meal because the Amish only have communion 3 or 4 times a year in church. And the elders said, that's right. So we consider our meals to be a sacred act. And we consider passing the bread to one another an act of communion that we share daily with our family and those we love. And Kendall nodded his head and said, yes, I understand. And the elder picked up the basket of bread and walked to the other side of the table to where Kendall was seated and asked him to stand. And then he reached out the basket of sliced bread and said, Kendall, would you like a piece of bread? And Kendall, tears running down his face, reached into that basket and pulled out a slice of bread and ate the entire slice. No one else said a word. No one resisted what the oldest elder was doing. They all knew that literally it was opposed to the Amish rule. But they all knew Kendall and his mother were right. Before the elder sat down, he said to Kendall, this is the largest Amish family in the United States, but word travels fast. And all 2,000 of them are going to know about this before downfall tonight. And I can tell you that every time we talk about this gathering of the elders, every time we speak about this meal around this table, you and your mother will be remembered for generations because you know the way of Jesus. What about you? How will you be remembered? Will people remember you because you've barged into some party and that you have anointed the good news of God's love for every person on the planet in some way, and they'll go, wow, oh, I won't forget that. That was something. Or will you be remembered because you stood up for someone at a table where you knew there was opposition and you said, this is a child of God. Respect this person. I love this person. Or will you be remembered because you have taken the sacred basket of sliced bread and you've held it out to someone who you don't completely understand, but you know that you should share this sacred moment together? How will you be remembered? How will I be remembered? How will we